Good morning. Hello to our friends and colleagues at North Caucasus Federal University in Stavropol, Russia. My name is Ken Reimer. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Winnipeg in the Faculty of Education. This is the second of three panels that we are having here as part of our collaboration that deals with transition. The topic for this second panel is challenges and innovations in transition. Before we begin, I'd just like to thank Frontier School Division located here in Manitoba, and in particular Bradley Hampson and Chris Catani for all of your work in helping us prepare and present these panels. So we have three guests today. I'm going to ask that they introduce themselves. We have Zefania, Benetta, and Nadine, who are all here to talk about challenges with transitions. I ask that you each introduce yourselves and your professional roles and a little bit about what work you do at this time. We'll begin with you, Zefania.
Thank you very much, Ken, for inviting me to be part of this panel. My name is Zefania Matanga. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Multicultural Disability Center, Inc. Most of our work we do is related to immigrants, particularly immigrants with disabilities, with the different challenges. Every summer, we work with students, youth from different schools, countries such as Ivory Coast, DRC, also from Somalia, and also some youth from Syria. This summer we had about 50 youth whom we worked with for almost 7 weeks, trying to help them to so that they can be integrated into the Canadian culture, and so that they can also be understanding how the systems works in Canada, and also to look at the different disability challenges which they experience, which one was the most emerging disabling condition which they had experienced was mental health, which some of them developed through the various camps they went through. Some of them were in camps for 7, 8 years, and some of them had experienced a lot of challenges, molestation and other kind of things that happen to them. So we are in the process of trying to help them go through that trauma so that they can be able to see that those challenges, yes, they happen, but how to overcome them so that they develop coping mechanism, both in transitioning from their countries and coming to Canada, and also try to deal with the different systems, and also to know that there are also challenges here they need to confront so that they get ready to confront those challenges. So that is most of the work which we do at the Canadian Multicultural Disability Center.
Thank you, Zefania. Benetta.
Hi, I'm Benetta Benson. I'm the founder and program director for OHA's Autism Programs. We're a registered charity here in Manitoba operating for the past 16 years. We offer activity programs specifically for children, youth, and adults with autism. So that's our focus. For the purpose of this discussion, we run a pre-employment supported paid work experience program for age 15 to 21 in cooperation with probably about 12 local businesses. We invest heavily in paid training for our staff so that they are well equipped to deal with the challenges related to the diagnosis of autism, and they go on in our community to provide excellent service as providers in a wide range of fields. So we also work collaboratively with other service providers on special activities for delivering or training projects. And finally, we really work to try to get the word out to families on other programs and services, and to try to pull this communication network together so that we can move forward, because everyone's unique and we want to try and fill a little bit of that service need.
Thank you, Benetta. Nadine.
Thanks for having me, Ken. My name is Nadine Bartlett, and I'm an assistant professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Manitoba. And my area is inclusive education. And my research area is exploring inclusive ways to support students with emotional and behavioral needs in schools and in community. And prior to joining the University of Manitoba, I was a high school teacher, a middle years teacher, and a resource teacher. and most recently a student services consultant. So in that role, I supported students, families, and school teams in transitioning students from school to the world of work. So that's my background.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you, Zafania, Bennett, and Nadine, you being here today. We've got about 5 questions for you here today in some different parts. And let me just begin with you, Nadine. In your opinion, what are the unique challenges faced by individuals with intellectual disabilities as they progress through high school and transition to work and adult life? And in your opinion, what best prepares them and supports them as they try to meet those challenges?
Well, thanks, Ken. I think I'd first like to say that I think here in Canada and Manitoba specifically, we've made tremendous gains in the area of inclusion. So I think that in early years and in middle years, we do an excellent job at ensuring that our students are included. So they're part of the regular classroom, they're experiencing extracurricular and academic opportunities alongside their peers. But I think regrettably, as students move on into high school, what we see is less opportunities for social and academic inclusion. And so I think we all have that awareness, and it's something we're working towards changing. But I think in spite of our philosophy of inclusion and our legislation around inclusion, we see high school students more often separated. And so when thinking about why is that, it's complex. There are many reasons why there are still barriers in high school. But I think some of them are programmatic, some of them are policy, some of them are attitudinal. And so we're still working towards overcoming some of those barriers. In terms of programmatic barriers, high school is just more challenging in the sense that curriculum is sometimes inflexible. And another piece, teachers often in high school might not have the training in terms of how to integrate or include students with disabilities in their classrooms. So that can be another barrier. In addition to lack of teacher training, there's also sometimes still the attitude in high school that students with disabilities are better off separated. And by that I mean I think parents sometimes and teachers sometimes, particularly at high school, struggle with what's most important. Should we focus on functional academics and life skills, or should we focus on still being a part of the classroom? And I think for many families and for many teachers, sometimes that becomes a dilemma. What do we focus on? And so it's finding that unique balance at high school. But I think sometimes too, we have to think about finding that balance, but also thinking about context. Does it always have to be separate? Even though we have functional life skills we want to work on, do they need to be in a separate classroom or a separate location? Or could those be embedded in the context of a regular school? And I think, so that's the dilemma that we sometimes wrestle with. Another structural barrier I think that exists too are needs of school divisions. Sometimes students in high school, they stop riding the bus with their same age peers. And at high school, they often have different schedules. They have shortened day, so they're not exposed to that social milieu that other students have the opportunity to be a part of. And so those are just some of, I think, the barriers that we see. And so trying to find a balance is difficult.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of trying to overcome trying to overcome those, I think looking at transition planning and focusing at a very early age, so beginning the transition process not midway through high school, but actually in the latter part of middle years, focusing on formalizing those processes and doing some backwards design, deciding where it is you want to go in the future is a critical piece.
So it seems to me that you're suggesting that to progress from high school and transition to work and adult life, that it should begin even before high school begins for many students.
Right, and I think part of that problem with transitioning to adult life and to work is if students are separated from their same age peers, yet we want them to work in environments along other peers, we're sometimes creating another barrier for them because they've missed those opportunities to practice authentic social interaction and social skills.
Okay, thank you very much. Benetta, from your perspective, what are some unique challenges?
I guess I would when you asked that question, I was thinking unique and individual, because that's really the key when you're talking about inclusion, when you're talking about any programs or challenges. Because with individuals with disabilities, they can't be lumped together. And certainly when you're talking about youth with autism, they're so unique in terms of, you know, social behavior, communication challenges, and often some are considered intellectually disabled because other behaviors and mannerisms cause other people to react to them as if they were disabled, and to treat them that way. And often they are therefore excluded from typical classrooms because they do need some support. So the idea of inclusion in a regular classroom, or separated so that there's groups that can actually learn something instead of being plopped in a class where there's no supports, not enough training. It's just, is that just a pretend situation, or is that real? So I think that often in our system right now, the policies and procedures have to be recognized as not the objectives and goals, but they seem to be. Here's the rules, here's what applies. It's not looking at the individual and saying, okay, what do we need to make this individual successful? And that is the challenge, I think, because it's so much easier to group people together and say, this is this school, this is this division, but often for families, it's the luck of the draw. Is this the EA that's trained and assigned to your child that meets their needs? Is this the resource teacher who's prepared to be flexible and adjust the curriculum a little? Is this the teacher who's willing to take on the challenges for adjusting the curriculum? It's kind of the luck of the draw now, which is a challenge for individuals. And I would say an internal challenge is really one for those with intellectual disabilities, and that is, you know, is there, and this is a question that needs to be asked all the way through high school to the possibility of post-secondary education and then work, is there an opportunity for self-direction? If so, you know, who is there to help you with that direction? Or based on your intellectual challenges or your family situation or whatever, you know, is it other directed? Do you need other people to plan for you because you're not able to make that plan? So I think the idea of being able to assess your own individual strengths and weaknesses, or not being able to do that, really is the challenge to inclusion in a lot of these areas moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Benetta. Zefania, you talked a little bit at the beginning about some of the folks that you work with and your organization work with, and some of them had dealt with a lot of past trauma. And so I'm going to ask you this question: what are the unique challenges faced by individuals with social, emotional, behavior disorders or trauma they've experienced as they progress through high school and transition to work and adult life? And in your opinion, what best prepares them and supports them as they try and meet those challenges?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. The most important thing is that to acknowledge is that there's been tremendous advancement in terms of policy development, particularly in Canada, with the introduction of the Charter of Freedom Rights, particularly Section 15, the Bill 13 in Education Act in Manitoba, and now we have the accessibility legislation going on, both at the provincial level and also at the federal level, which was just introduced sometime in was it June or towards the end of the parliamentary session this year. Those are very good framework to work from. They provide an opportunity to at least utilize the law if necessary. But the most important aspect for all individuals, and what we believe, is how you tell your own story. This is the most challenging for many people. And the concept of telling your own story began in South Africa after apartheid, in which people were trying to see how do we frame through the process of truth and reconciliation our differences without further fighting or having conflicts, but how do we frame in such a way that issues, even though which are very painful and difficult, can be talked about. So The most important thing is for an individual to be able to tell his or her own story. That's the most challenging. Even if you are looking for a job, you have to be able to go and advocate. Yeah, I can do this job. This is what I can do. If you want your teacher to understand, because when you get into the class, sometimes the teachers, I'm not excusing them for not supporting, but what I'm saying is sometimes they might not understand the whole, what your experiences are and so forth at an individual level. And also it goes with the parents for particular immigrants. They are new, they are struggling, they are looking for employment in Canada, or there are challenges back home, or they are dealing with so many things that they don't even have enough time to go and talk to the teachers and other authorities about the challenges experienced by their children. So their children are on their own. And so the thing is, important is, how do we come with a strategy to make these people be able to articulate their situation so that other people can understand what they are going through, particularly in the issues of invisible disabilities such as mental health. How do you explain? There are some kind of myth around some of these mental health issues, which has been written about and talked about over many years, which we have found that, so there should be a process of deconstructing that myth, but it needs also the individual himself or herself to understand exactly what is his feeling, what's going on, and how can he articulate it so that the people who are around him, his friends, his teachers, his resource teachers can understand what's going on. But also, it would also important for teachers and other people to try and come up with strategies on how to enable those students to talk, to communicate their thoughts freely without fear, so that they can be able to articulate, this is what I'm feeling, this is what is my intent, this is what I want to accomplish. And also to take ownership of their problems is one of the most important things. Yes, we want all the people to help, but if the student and the parents and the families take ownership of their problem, then they can try to solve them. Not in terms of blaming themselves, but to say, yeah, this is the problem we have. It's our problem. We need to fix it. And this is how we're going to work with the system to see if my child is having a problem with maths or English and so forth, or whatever subject area, I'm able to go and see this teacher and sit down and how can we help, so that there should be a system in which the child is having problem both at home and at school. And everybody at the same page. It might not be the same page, but at least there is an understanding. So in the process of also trying to look for a job, employers are going to hire people whom they think they'll be competent to do their work. And as much as we want to try to talk about employment equity, but also the youth will be looking for employment, even who can start them by getting, the government is very good program right now for what is called Canada Summer Job, in which they provide funding for employers to hire youth. And many people with youth with disability, immigrants, have actually benefited from it. But the most important thing, they should now be able to help themselves articulate their skills, their ideas, and how they will implement it. That's the most important help for an individual with disabilities. And the system which should be in place. So we need to coordinate all these pieces so that we are able to help those people with challenges, particularly our children, when we had this year, who are from diverse cultures. At the same time, they are trying to understand the Canadian culture. They are also trying to deal with the trauma they've undergone. So the most important thing is for them to understand that this is part of life. There are problems, but we have to overcome them. And we have seen that working very well successfully.
Thank you, Zafania. And we're going to come back to you a little bit later to speak about coordinating that type of collaboration with different agencies in the schools. Nadine, I'm just curious from your perspective, and you spent a significant amount of time working in schools, unique challenges facing individuals with social, emotional, behavior disorders and how they progress from high school to adult life. Can you speak, just add a little bit from a school experience?
And sure, just to build on what Zefania was saying about mental health, and certainly the stigma still exists. And I think, like inclusion, we're working towards reducing stigma, but it's still there. And I think one of the most significant barriers here in Canada and elsewhere is access to mental health services. And so often in schools we see students with behavior challenges, but they've not yet been diagnosed. And so when they engage in acting out behavior, there's often a zero tolerance policy in school. So, you know, Bonetta, you spoke of some policy challenges. So students with emotional and behavior challenges are often the first students to be excluded from school, so suspended or expelled. And so in the absence of maybe the supports that they need to keep them in school. So that's a huge hurdle. Along with those zero tolerance policies, and another challenge is that sometimes in schools we're not necessarily using evidence-based practices to support behavior. So students may be subjected to behavior management practices that aren't the most effective and that aren't teaching alternative or replacement behaviors. So we end up actually exacerbating the problem. And so an example might be an exclusionary timeout space, or something that isn't teaching behavior and improving or changing the situation. So often this is the population of students who have very negative life outcomes. So not only are they expelled and suspended, they often are students who don't attend. They have low attendance rates. So when we expel them and suspend them, we're really just increasing the problem, right? So when we think of solutions for students with emotional and behavior problems, I think it can be, just in a nutshell, we need to keep them in school. So that's our priority. If they're in school, we can teach those pro-social behaviors. But unfortunately, I think our rigid policies around behavior are sometimes used in a way to punish. And that's certainly not their intent, but sometimes that's what ends up happening. So in terms of supports for students with emotional and behavior issues, if the behavior is severe, these might be students who have had exposure to youth justice and had some very negative experiences. And what the stats show is that when they graduate from high school, they often don't get jobs, and if they do, they're low paying, and they change jobs frequently, and they often have ongoing encounters with the justice system. So we need to break that pattern. And one evidence-based practice that is being used in some schools in Manitoba, but not really broadly, it's used more in the United States, is the idea of school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports, which really promotes the use of evidence-based practices. And so I'm happy to say we are seeing it being used in some of our schools, which is, I think, a positive step. And the real positive is that it is looked at as a proactive, let's teach skills, and without the focus on the reactive to punish. Because that, if we can teach and get in front of the behaviors, we're going to change the life outcomes for those
She's
students.
saying that's so much more politely than I can.
Oh.
Basically, in the schools, they get suspended. I mean, that's it. So parents are called from work to go pick up their kids, and nobody's collectively solving this problem. And social behavior, emotional challenges, and as they're exhibited, are the greatest barrier to employment, because it's ruthless. You can't call the mom to come and pick up the child. You'd get fired from your job, right? So for typical and you have to kind of look at people with disabilities a little differently, because they don't have a social peer group to sort of mold behavior in different settings. For example, typical teens understand with peers you can behave a certain way, not when the principal's walking in the room. For a lot of youth with social, emotional, or behavior disorders, adults are controlling their behavior. And so they don't really learn how to talk in a staff room, or how to talk when, you know, the audit's coming through or whatever. So unfortunately, there's kind of two schools of thoughts. One is, this is me, accept me who I am, and you have to change to accommodate me, which is very challenging when there's been no dealing with these behavior challenges all the way through, and now you've got an adult who exhibits these kinds of behaviors, and it's, without major intervention, it's really challenging to find employment. Or it's, you need to fit some normative standards of behavior, and the schools have to be working with this to do some key behavior learning. And I think for us in our programs, video feedback has been extremely helpful, because for youth with autism, they just don't see how other people perceive them. So this idea of, and we've done it with a low cognitive little guy who was, you know, ripping apart toys and biting them. And we did it with a youth who really was having totally normal looking, but when there's a win-lose situation in a game or a sport, he'd just have a huge tantrum. And then there was another with an adult who was extremely argumentative and interrupting. Like, no matter what the discussion was in the team meeting, he had a better idea. So we videotaped it, and here you need training and you need debriefing, because in fact you are judging this behavior, but you're also asking them to judge this behavior too. And in all the situations that we've done this, the person's totally shocked. Like, they just have no idea that this is what their behavior looks like, and this is how other people spontaneously reacted to that behavior. So I think that if we do not deal with some really solid strategies on social behavior and emotional issues and challenges that don't fit into what would work for them in the real world, then we are really doing a disservice to this youth.
Well, thank you. And you bring up a very good example there with video and feedback by watching video and how you engage with others. Maybe Nadine, I'll start with you. Are there other examples of ways to engage students in a wide variety of opportunities that may lead to personal connections and experiences that shape the way to employment and can help be successful with employment?
I think so. There are many, I think, happening here in our province, and we talked already a little bit about really early exposure to employment opportunities. And in a school division where I previously worked, the exposure to the world of work actually starts in grade 5. And so typically we think of work exposure grade 11, grade 12, as students are about to leave us. So we're actually getting in front of it at age 10. Already taking them to, we have a project called Hands-on Techno Trades, where they go to a college and they're actually exposed to technology. So planting that seed early is critical. Another piece is involving families. The role of parents in advocacy is absolutely critical. And so ensuring that they're part of the planning and part of the determining what their child's future or their young adult's future is going to look like. And we've already talked a bit, but I can't underestimate the importance of specifically teaching self-determination and self-advocacy. Being able to explain what your disability is, being able to say what supports you require in the work setting, in the school setting, are critical. And what the research shows is that communication skills are one of the primary predictors of employment. So if you are able to communicate even your basic wants and needs, then you're going to have a greater likelihood of gaining employment. Supportive community employers, that is key. And for school divisions to forge partnerships with employers in their neighborhood and community. And many school divisions actually have dedicated staff that are responsible for going out into the community, making connections with businesses, and talking to them about accepting students in employment opportunities. So I think when you have those kinds of supports, you're starting them early on, students are absolutely going to benefit.
Well, thank you very much. I'm just going to move on with Zafania here, because you mentioned something very interesting about in order for students to make personal connections with employers, schools need to have systemic connections with different agencies and different organizations, including employers. Zafania, picking up on what you spoke about earlier, what do you see as some of the barriers and also opportunities for collaboration between government, schools, community service, and advocacy agencies, as well as public and private enterprises in promoting meaningful opportunity for employment for individuals with disabilities?
Thank you very much for that question. The first, let me just elaborate a little bit. In our, one interesting thing which is now developing in the immigrant community is called, it's very recent, it's called community parenting. By community parenting, because parents have different kind of jobs, sometimes if you call the parent, because of sometimes they are new and sometimes they are immigrant, they are even afraid of asking their employers that I want to take a day off to go and see the challenges my parents, my child is experiencing. Although this has been a very big kind of approach to raising kids in particularly back home in Zimbabwe, it has been being discouraged, I mean, because of the cultural differences. Now, community parenting is that elders of the community, they can now go and represent, but they need some authorization from their parents if a child is experiencing some problem in school, so they can go and represent them. They can request somebody in the community, as long as there is a consensual consent form, which has been filled, so that that person can be conducted. So this is really producing very positive results, so that the children being taught how to also to be able to listen to the elders, so that when they tell them, usually we have discovered sometimes children listen more to people who are not their parents than their parents sometimes. So we have found that working very well. Now, in terms of accessing employment, you can. It is important for the schools to sort of work with parents and also work with the employment agencies and also other organizations to try and see if their children can be admitted to certain programs for job experience, and sometimes not only paid work but volunteer, if they can volunteer themselves. So encouraging themselves to participate in the community at large, not just at employment, but at all. You know, back home in Africa, when you are engaged in politics, you might know this is your death sentence or something like that. But we have been encouraging them also to go and participate in political activities, social activities, so that you become part of the community, and telling them, though, it's not bad to support this, to communicate your thoughts and feelings. And also, if you are also able to communicate your thoughts and feelings, you are able to network. You can get jobs through this connection, these networks. So you cannot just get a job while you are sitting in your house or whatever. What you need is to be able for people to know who you are, what your skills, what you offer, and how do you also relate to other people who can also provide you with recommendations. Yeah, we worked with this young man or young woman, he's able to do this. So that is very important, because especially our youth, when they don't even have reference, there's nobody who can talk on their behalf, that we can testify on their behalf. Yeah, we know this guy, he can do this or who can do that. So the most important is to overcome those barriers, and it can be done by working with a number of agencies, both advocate agencies, employers, and also work with the people in the field. That will be very helpful, particularly to immigrants with disabilities.
Thank you very much. It sounds to me that if we're going to have collaboration between schools and government and community services and advocacy agencies, we also need to include the parents and the caregivers as part of this collaboration. Banana or Nadine, would you care to comment on barriers and opportunities for collaboration?
Yes, I would like to say that. So I think when you're talking about collaboration, it sort of sounds like everybody's sort of equal partners and we're just trying to merge things. But then you get to the key issues of collaboration, which is money, who's going to pay for things, and leadership, who's going to be accountable for the results. So in the ideal world, what we would have is top-down leadership, whether it's government, business leaders, decisive action on plans, somebody getting a small group together, deciding on the goals, putting a plan in place, and then doing some overall evaluation and critique. Well, that's not the reality we're facing. So what we have now then is, in the absence of that, we have bottom-up parent advocacy happening. For example, there's in Ontario a group called Spectrum Works just ran the second year of their job fair, and it was parent-driven, but they got 300 individuals with autism, 10 employers, and 15 support agencies together at a job fair to look at who are really the businesses who do want to include those with autism and disabilities, and really trying to cut to the chase instead of trying to make everybody happy. You're saying, come to the table, let's make it happen. So it's parent driven, It's advocacy driven, and it's time driven, because parents don't have 10 years to wait for a government program to be put into place. They want it now. So that sense of urgency is coming from the bottom up. And that's the only kind of collaboration that we're seeing right now.
Okay, thank you. Nadine?
Just to add to that, I think one of the most significant barriers to collaboration in our system, and sort of in any system that involves individuals with disability, is this notion of criteria, that you need to meet certain criteria in order to be eligible to receive service X. And so I think as long as we work under this system where there's criteria that you need to fit into a box, and I think, Vanetta, you spoke quite eloquently about everyone's an individual and that individuals with disabilities are no different. And so, but when we say you need to fit into a box to get a support, we're really reducing opportunities, and we're taking away the individual from that equation. And so in Manitoba, we've made some steps towards reducing categorical funding in schools. It's still there, but reducing it. But regrettably, when we look at transition to adult services, when students turn 18 in our province, they still now have to be assessed through something called the supports intensity scale, where again, they are categorized into 7 different levels, and then they are put into a service system, or they are given a certain amount of funding based on that. So those kind of parameters, I think, are barriers to collaboration. They're frustrating for parents and families. And again, they come down to who's paying for what service. And that should never be the focus. Our focus should be on the individual. So I think that's certainly a barrier. But if I could talk about an opportunity that I think is related, but it was sort of in the last question. I think as school divisions, something that's progressive that we're doing is we're trying to change the role of some of our EAs, or educational assistants in high school, to function in the role of what's called a job coach. And I know those are out in other supported employment opportunities, but high schools are starting to specifically train educational assistants to serve as job coaches. So they go into work sites with our students, they assess the environment, they conduct task analysis, they learn about the employment, and then they coach the student through those employment opportunities. They look for natural support. So when I'm not here as a job coach, who can help? And through those processes, we're seeing tremendous opportunity for students to gain employment and then to stay in that employment. So I think when schools take on some of those responsibilities, there's excellent opportunity for students to gain sustainable long-term employment. So.
Yes, Benetta.
Add that if you're talking about job coaches and the rest of it, I think in the school system there's a different valuation of what quality jobs are. I mean, when we're talking about jobs, I think the whole Red River Community College, construction, all kinds of trades, they are opportunities, I think, that aren't really discussed too much even for typical kids in the school. It's just go to university, go get a profession. It's not get a job and be a professional. That still requires training. It requires expertise, safety management, whatever. But I think for people who are less verbal, maybe less intellectually developed, some of these areas could be potential job opportunities as well. But when we're talking about them, we're mostly talking about service jobs, working in grocery stores, maybe IT for those who are higher functioning, and not really the broad base of job opportunities that should be presented to those with disabilities.
Okay, so you see informational technology as one option for some work, or that's something that's goes on to
I think there's just not a broad base of looking at where are some opportunities, because it's really lead time. For typical kids, they have a lot more time to play with it. They may go to school, they may take a year off, they may travel, they may do this, they may start university and then try another program because they're self-managed, right? Whereas those with more challenges are more people managed, or else they need a lot of support, so they can't afford to make a lot of mistakes. You kind of want to try and gear them, trying to assess their interests, trying to assess, how much time commitment could they put towards the job? Is 15 hours the maximum they could stand? What about the pressures of deadlines, or working in a library is quite a lot different from working in a very, very busy, stocking place, so the environment and that sort of thing. So all I'm saying is that in the school, I've found, even being a parent myself, is that there's a gearing towards university or more academic things, and not a real respect for manual labor and some of the other jobs that build our economy just as much.
Okay, thank you. And we're moving on to our final question for this panel. And thank you very much for all that you've given us to think about. Final question. How do we balance the needs of the service providers, that is the schools, the agencies, and the employers, for example, with the needs of the clients? And I'm talking about the students and also the workers with disabilities. Any thoughts? Benetta, you look like you want to start this one off.
Okay, you sort of say that, and I think it's a little bit the wrong question, because it really is a question that says, how can we make everyone happy? And I think that's really difficult unless the goals are very clear. And I come more from the private sector myself, and so in the private sector it's very clear. You serve the customer or you go out of business. If you don't have trained staff, if they don't know what they're doing, if the service is poor, if the forms are too complicated to fill out, if you don't have a website that's clear and clickable through, you lose your customers, right? I think in this business, where we're talking about education and planning and career opportunities for those with the disabilities, we've forgotten who the customer is. So the process and the rules and regulations are more important. We mentioned EAs. EAs are assigned based on seniority instead of what's a good fit for the person. So how do you make that balanced? Do you say we make the union happy or we make the client happy? And I think that this is a real key challenge, is that you can't make everybody happy and balance it unless you have a very clear idea of what the goal is. And if you do, then you can say, okay, well, we can make you happy doing this, but we can't make you happy doing this, because this is what's the most important thing.
Thank you. Zefania, anything to add about balancing the needs or making everyone happy?
Yeah, it's still, we should make an effort. I know it's challenging. There are a lot of challenges out there, but it's still within the system, current system at this moment. We need to come up with something which can work. We look at all systems which are in place. How can we help the student with a disability to overcome this, including bureaucratic challenges, as well as financial challenges, and also dealing with all other social problems. So the first thing is help the student to articulate his or her own needs, to be able to tell a story, a positive story about him or herself. It could be in skills, it could be in sports, it could be in manual labor, whatever it is. If they're able to tell a story about themselves and then try to make the system or the teachers, the resources understand, to be able to see in a student what is good. Sometimes we focus, as human beings always have negative experiences and so forth. And if we have come across a student whom you think is very challenging, whenever that student is coming to your office or a meeting, you begin to say, again? So you begin to, but let's try to make things work out of the situation we have and build the children so that they are able, when they leave school, to be able to see, yeah, sure, my teachers and my school tried to help me, my parents tried to help me, but there are still challenges which I also need to face. I need also to deal with these other situations. And those situations might not go away. But to understand your own situation, how you deal with it, and to try and also understand other people. One of the most important things I've learned in my life is to listen than talk. Because when you listen, you learn more than talking, so that you learn more from people, from others, and you are able to get directions. So I always encourage, especially my youth whom work with, try to do as much listening as possible more than talking, and try to be able to select what is good and bad advice, and what do you think you can do and you may not do. What if it's impossible? Don't try it. If it doesn't work, don't blame yourself or blame. Of course, there could be things that might have gone wrong, which you might have done wrong, or somebody could have done wrong, but don't focus on this other negative aspect, because it's going to tie you down. But try to always look at the best out of yourself and the best out of other people whom you are working for. So if you try to look at I know there are challenges of financial categorizing, funding and those kind. You are going to always have those challenges, but try to look at the best you can, which is out of the system, the best out of yourself, the best out of your community. Then you can come up with something the best for yourself.
Thank you, Zafania. Nadine, concluding thought?
Just in terms of, really, I think we need to think of employing students with disabilities or individuals with disabilities as a moral imperative, that it's something that we want to do because it's the right thing to do. And we certainly don't want it to be a business case, but I think in reality, as you said, Bennett, it often comes down to being a business issue, right? Hiring someone who can perform the duties. And I just wanted to highlight a program we have here in our province called the High School Apprenticeship Program, where students actually earn high school credit and they learn and they earn a trade. And often we think of that program as exclusionary or maybe only encouraging the involvement of students who don't have disabilities. But what I'm very pleased to note is that that particular high school apprenticeship program includes students who have modified credits. So they can actually go into business, earn high school credit, and they're paid at the same time. And so when they finish grade 12, they might need to do some upgrading, but they're allowed adaptations in the process, and they actually can get paid employment. And because it is a bit of a business case, our province actually provides incentives. So companies are given a percentage of that individual's wages in order to help promote the hiring of people with disabilities. So I think that's a positive piece.
Well, Nadine, Benetta, Zafania, I want to thank you. I wish we could continue to visit and talk much further, but our time is up. I want to thank you all for being here, and we thank you for our audience at North Caucasus Federal University for your listening. So ends panel number 2. Thank you very much.